William Graham's got all the money, tight bastard.
Well, didn't he pay you?
No, he don't pay no one.
Hello there, my name is Gavin Walsh and today is Friday the 20th of August 2026. I believe last Monday I put up a short video about how artificial intelligence was potentially valuing a fantastic Sex Pistols collection at anything from $15 to $25 million. The only rule I put on that at that time was that there would be no duplicates. In other words, everything would be counted as one unique item. So you would have one single pressed in Turkey, and if there was a second pressing, you could include that, but you would not include two of any of the same pressing or the same variant or the same anything for that matter. So everything would be unique. And then I left it wide open to memorabilia, artwork, posters, everything. And the figure came back at an astounding 15 to 25 million. Now, at that point, I gave my opinion that had I been asked a question point blank, I would have said $6 to $8 million and 10 million at a real stretch. Now, my inbox, my private messenger has been flooded with queries since, some from collectors and other from people just curious and whatnot. And, what is the veracity or the truth of this? So what I've decided to do, I'm going to do a few videos, and I don't know how many there'll be in it, but I'm going to do a few videos and I'm going to try and get to the bottom of it. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go back on the exact question I asked AI, and I'm going to compartmentalize it or break it down into components. And I'm going to deal with each component at a time. And I've decided to start off with the highly elusive and extremely valuable, what are called acetates. Now, for those of you not in the know, let me tell you exactly what an acetate is. As a record collector, I've always just simply considered it as the master recording, but let me give you the proper definition to it. An acetate recording is a type of phonograph disc featuring a metal core coated with lacquer, and it is used historically for instant recording, broadcast playback and quality testing before mass production of the vinyl records themselves. Now, to my knowledge, the vast majority of commercial recordings all are backed up by acetates. In other words, there was always an acetate there that they were created from. I don't think that was the same for bootlegs. I think bootlegs just go straight to recording. But I have seen a Pistols bootleg, an acetate of a Pistols bootleg, and indeed one of Public Image as well. Now, I went back on my own book here, and I saw first of all, let me say what I did first. I asked AI how much would if you had every acetate, unique acetate that the band ever had or was released or sold, and bear in mind a lot of these have made it to auctions, what would the acetate component of the collection be worth? And it came back with a pretty figure that I would not be too disharmonious with. It said about I believe 700,000 it came back with. Again, prices in dollars, because that's what AI seems to default to, but again you can work back whatever that is in sterling and euro or yen if you're from Japan. It guessed anything around the $500,000 to $700,000 mark. Now, I went back on my own book, and bear in mind this book is 25 years old, and I believe I had on page 114 and 115, almost 50 there. I think it's about 47 or 48 listed. Now, since then, because this book is 25 years old, I continue cataloguing the Sex Pistols, I think till around November 2005, and I'll go into in another video what happened at that time that I pretty much abruptly stopped. But by the time I finished cataloguing them, I had that number well over 60, about 64 or 65. So I would concur with the AI figure of 700,000. And if anything, it's been a bit conservative now. As you know, I would have underestimated the AI stuff. In fact, I'm deliberately underestimating from 25 million down to 10 max. But the 700,000 here, I think, sticks, and it might even go up to 8, or even it might even go to the million, because what we've seen in recent years in auctions is the acetates in a lot of cases. I think very recently one of them made 17,000 pounds. That's British sterling, so that's about 23, 24, maybe $25,000. So if you're talking 60 64, 65 acetates that we know of. You multiply that and you won't be long coming to the million. But there are, of course, other acetates out there that we don't know. Now, in my own book, and I'm not looking for any praise when I say this, but I wanted it to be as reasonably accurate as possible. So if I didn't have the acetate, or if I didn't know somebody with it and we had all the information on it and it was verified, it generally didn't go in. So I would say the listing of acetates that's in God Save the Sex Pistols is pretty accurate, but it's not definitive because more have come up since. So I'm going to be conservative and I'm going to stick with the AI figure of whatever that was, 700,000 or 800,000. Okay. Way back in the late 80s, I was determined to get to San Francisco for the Sex Pistols 10th anniversary, and I went to Winterland Ballroom, but it was a block of condominiums on the 14th of January 1988, so it's almost 40 years ago. But at that time, I believe I got this person's details from the Goldmine magazine, which was the American edition of Record Collector, or the American equivalent of Record Collector, and it was a big tabloid paper, and it used to come out with scores of pages and literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of record listings. But I got a detail there, or a listing there of a guy who operated a private sort of shop out of his house, and it was called Let It Be, obviously after the Beatles track. And I remember his name was Cliff, and I formed a sort of a friendship with him anytime I'd be in San Francisco, which, thanks to family friends back then, was as often as I could get out. But in the first time I was in with Cliff, he had the original master copy of Nevermind the Bollocks, the Pistols' epic and debut album, on the Warner Brothers label. That's the American version. And he also had the original signed contract of their last ever gig, which was in San Francisco at Winterland. Bill Graham, or Billy Graham, was the concert promoter. The money he wanted at that time for that particular contract was out of my league on that visit. But as I came into money in the 1990s, then he just abjectly refused to sell. But along the way, I did pick up this Nevermind the Bollocks acetate from Cliff, and there's a bit of a funny story to it, because back in the 90s, I used to go on a round the world record trip, and I used to go down to Australia, and there was a very, very strong collector in Melbourne by the name of Glenn. And hello, Glenn, if you're watching this. And one particular, I would go, by the way, I'd stop off at Glenn's, and we could spend up to a week cataloguing the stuff. And I'd like to thank you now, Glenn, even though I did thank you in the book. Thanks for all the input. You helped me with my listings at that time. And I met Glenn several times, maybe 5 times. I know there was 2 times I went to Australia and I didn't meet him. Where he was in Japan probably at that time, or maybe Europe. He was part of a shop that's still on the go called Vicious Sloth Collectibles, and himself and Angelo, and I think the other guy's name was Peter. And we used to have great chats. But I used to go to Glenn's house, and we'd catalogue. We'd try and catalogue as definitively as we could all of the pistol stuff. And this particular day, I was in Glenn's house, and some subject came up about San Francisco, and he said to me, "Were you ever in Let It Be Records?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been there." And he said, I was there recently, or he was there maybe 2 years earlier, because it had to be more than a year ago. And he said, "I was there a while back, and myself and the guy, we pulled the place asunder looking for Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks acetate." And of course, I had a hard job keeping a straight face. And he just point blank asked me, "Did you get it?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "When did you get it?" And I said, "This is why I know it was more than a year ago." I said, "I got it when I was passing through in January, because I used to pass through California on New Year's Eve, every New Year's Eve. And that way I get 2 New Year's Eves, one in New Zealand, Auckland, and one in San Francisco. And I go to the world's number 1 bar, the Iron Gator, as it has now been demoted to the world's number 2 bar, which was in San Lorenzo, California. But evidently what had happened is that when Glenn was there, the guy just couldn't put his hands on it, and he subsequently found it. But I bought the record for that much. I sold it for that much, and today it's worth that much. I wouldn't even like to think what it's worth today. It was a case of having to sell it at the time. I'm going to now play a little clip of where I was on Irish national television about 30 years ago. My collection headlined the Royal Festival Hall. So it was basically royalty meeting anti-royalty for the first time. In other words, the Queen is the patron, or the Queen was the patron of the Royal Festival Hall, and the Royal Festival Hall headlined a punk graphics festival, of which exhibition, excuse me, of which the Pistols obviously formed the largest part. And you know, without looking for any ado here, my collection was the major collection on display at it, and it went all around the world. It went to Japan, I believe, Tokyo. It went to, I think, Ottawa in Canada. It went to a few places, and it was a great show. But in any event, it prompted an Irish national television crew to come over and film me at the opening of it, and you will see me boast about this fantastic acetate that I had picked up. So let's roll on to that now, okay?
This was the main album they had called Never Mind the Bollockses. Went on to sell millions worldwide. This is the original master copy. Only one in existence. The plates came off this one. I bought that from a dealer who worked with Warner Brothers some years back in San Francisco. Much. At that time I paid $500 for it.
What's it worth now?
It's practically priceless.
Okay, when I was doing this, the super duper high value, potential high value of the pistol stuff, I used a few of them. I didn't just use one. I used ChatGPT. I used Google AI, and I used Gemini AI. And I find Gemini to be a bit more smoother, more accurate. You can get more detail out of it, but that's just a personal opinion. When one of the things that prompted up each time was that it would close out by saying that the sum of the parts can sometimes be worth more than the individual parts if a big wig like a tech billionaire or something like that gets involved. And that just put me thinking, and that gave me a memory right back to the store I've just mentioned, Let It Be, the store where I had got the Bollockses Warner Brother acetate out of, and where I'd hoped to get the Winterland contract out of. So let me explain a bit of background here about all of that first. Billy Graham was an American concert promoter, and he took over an ice skating rink, I believe 1971, and he converted it into a ballroom, a nightclub, as we might call it. And he called it the Winterland Ballroom, and the Sex Pistols were to play there on January the 14th, 1978. Now, what nobody in the whole world knew that day as they were getting ready to play, but one person knew it, and that was Johnny Rotten, and that was that he was going to abruptly abandon the band at the end of the concert. And he not only was going to do that, he was going to announce it publicly. He didn't even tell his bandmates. He didn't tell Malcolm McLaren. He didn't tell anybody. And so the concert went ahead that night with Billy Graham handling the contract of it in his venue, obviously. Billy Graham himself, or Bill Graham as he was known, not the preacher Billy Graham. Bill Graham was a major concert promoter across America, but specifically in California. And he had booked the Pistols to play that night, and I believe it was a 5,400-seater venue, and they filled the venue. The concert went off as to be expected, and but as I just said at the end of the night, Johnny Rotten shocked everyone by just announcing something funny like, "Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Ha ha ha, good night."
Ah ha ha, ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night.
And that was the end of the Sex Pistols. They just abruptly folded there and then. But so the Pistols ending was always going to be tied into San Francisco. Now I know they did reform in 18 years later in 1996, but that's irrelevant from the point I'm making. So the guy in Let It Be Records had the original contract for the last ever concert that the Sex Pistols played. But he also had a lot of other things. In fact, I used to joke with him when I'd go in a shop. I used to say, you're sitting on millions here in Beatles. And he just shrugged his shoulders. He was cool about it. He was a fantastic Beatles collector and also dealer. But turns out he had a lot of other stuff. The Pistols weren't even a side interest to him, I believe. Because at one point he joked with me, because I was getting the best of American posters off him. A lot of Warner Brothers promotional posters that a lot of them had not been seen back in Europe at that time. And one day he joked with me and he said, "Do you think I don't know you're going back to London and putting these into Sotheby's?" And of course I kept a straight face and said, "Oh, I'm not doing that." I actually did do it once or twice, but I paid a fair price for them, and such is business. But one particular day I was in with him, and I said to him, whatever came up, I was joking with him about the Sex Pistols contract, and he said something to me about that he had recently had a guy in, and so now I may not have this exact because it's 26, 27 years ago, but this big limousine pulls up outside the door, and I think there was another car or two with it, and all these bodyguards hopped out, and in comes this big guy into his shop, and by appointment, you ring the bell, whatever. And then he comes and he has one or two of his minders with him inside the shop, and he basically announces he wants everything that Cliff in this store has belonged to Jimi Hendrix. And of course, I'm sure Cliff was saying to him, "Well, this is not for sale, that's on." I think the guy more or less just told him everything's for sale. And Cliff's abiding memory is he told me the story with the guy just handed him a gold credit card, and he felt the weight of it, and he just said, basically, run the card. Well, as it turned out, this guy was a tech billionaire, and he was the third richest man in America, in the world actually at that time. And he was his name was Paul Allen, and he was one of the two Microsoft founders, himself and Bill Gates. And what he was doing at that time, he was going around discreetly and just buying everything belonging to Hendrix. And he committed to spending $250 million on the Jimi Hendrix Museum in Seattle. Bear in mind, Paul Allen was from Seattle. Jimi Hendrix was from Seattle, and he wanted this as his legacy. And indeed, I believe he bought a contract for Jimi Hendrix's last concert, which was in Seattle from this dealer, Let It Be. Now, I might have the detail on that wrong, but that just shows you the tech billionaires are out there, and it resonated with me when I read this thing more than once. The sum of the parts collectively can be worth more than the individuals, because somebody that's splashing around money would just want to get it all in one big quick swoop. In any event, so Billy Graham had hosted the Pistols, the Sex Pistols, that night in Winterland. Johnny Rotten went out with a bang, and nobody knew the Pistols were gone really till the next day. Johnny just disappeared. So such is it, such was life, And of course, by abruptly abandoning them, he also added to their collectability. So we're back to square one every time. So anyway, just to sum up, I am happy to say that from the bit of research I've done, that the Pistols acetates are worth a minimum of, let's say, about $750,000. Because if you go multiplying out, I think about 65 have been catalogued, and you multiply them out by the potential prices, you're well over $1 million. But keeping it conservative, because I'm determined to prove that the AI figures of 25 million are grossly exaggerated, and if I get it anywhere down near 6, I'd be happy. But imagine that's still a fantastic investment if you were collecting them. Okay, cheers guys, up the Pistols.